and welcome to the first SIR podcast. This is Tony Cañas of Insurance Nerds and host of Profiles in Risk podcast. Got involved with SIR early this year after attending the conference in Chicago and suggested the idea that we needed a podcast, and they've taken me up on it. So Jeff Dahms, PhD, who is the Director of Customer Experience Research and Insights at Physicians Mutual. So first of all, thank you for joining us today. So first, I'd love to hear a little bit how you ended up involved in doing research within the insurance space and ended up getting involved with SIR.
Yeah, well, I will spare you from all the gory details, but basically, I've had a pretty eclectic career. Started in teaching, went into nonprofit and like organizational development, and then started really getting into market research, which ultimately led me to Physicians Mutual here. As part of my PhD program, really did a lot of studying around customer experience and specifically service climate and how the internal workings of an organization can really impact that customer's experience. Like, what are the connections between what we're doing internally and how we're structured, and what do we promote, and our philosophies and our culture and climate and all this stuff, and how that actually has a connection, to the way that customers are treated and the outcome of like actually growth and profitability and retention. And so it's been a fun ride. It's been an interesting ride. There's been some ups and downs, but I've definitely learned a lot in my time. And yeah, just have always had a passion for kind of people. So whether it's internally, the internal organization, how people go about their work, how do they remain engaged, then also then the customer side, why do people buy, why do people stay, and what kind of value do they get from working with different organizations?
Okay. And when did you become involved with SIR?
So actually, it's pretty interesting. I was on a call, so I got connected with a guy named Luke Frazier. So I don't know if we can call out people here directly, but
Absolutely.
he's at a place called Stepwise, and we met through a connection, and we've just had similar conversations. And then I saw he had a webinar. He invited me to a webinar he was doing alongside SIR, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So then he recommended we go to the conference, and so reached out and asked if they needed any speakers, and they took me up on my offer on the content that I provided. And so I actually went and spoke in May in Chicago, and then have been a big fan ever since. And so just tried to stay connected, attending some webinars and looking at their materials, and looking to go back and hopefully speak in Kansas City next year.
Luke has actually been on my main podcast. He was episode
Oh,
605 on the Profiles in Risk podcast. It's a small world we live in insurance. Before we start recording, you mentioned that your world with Physicians Mutual is particularly interesting.
we sell to people who are retired. So it's the Physicians Mutual name can be a little deceiving, but we do sell directly to consumers. So older adults, 55 and older, from all walks of life.
Okay, perfect. And it's specifically the market that you serve is the 55 and older market.
Yes.
So you were mentioned that market is a little tougher to research.
Yeah, it's a little challenging. It's a bit of a niche group in some cases. So if you think of typical markets research, if you're a Coca-Cola or Target or even larger insurance companies like United Healthcare, like you just, your breadth of who you serve is so vast that, there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, you could walk down the street and ask somebody about, their auto insurance, and everybody has it. And so there's just a lot more opportunities to get feedback, and so it makes things a little bit easier. I used to work for a bank, did something similar that I'm doing here for them, and not that it was easy, but it was a little bit easier because everybody has banks. Doesn't matter the age or the population, like everybody needs them. So we're a little bit niche in that we have very specialized products. We have Medicare supplements, so not everybody has Medicare supplements. Some people are on Medicare, some people are on Med Advantage. We also offer dental insurance as a supplement, and there's a various options for that, but it's, after your employee coverage is, basically ended after you retire. And then we also offer life insurance, which is kind of a product that you can enter in any stage of your life, and some people need it, and some people have other means of paying for their end of life care. Um, so it's a bit of a niche in that way, and that our audience is small. But I will say the one thing, and I don't know if this is just our customers, but they're pretty forthcoming. I think with the older generation, they when you ask them how things are going, that they will tell you. They are very open and very honest, and we really appreciate that because it gives us um, a lot of things that we can use to kind of guide our strategy in our business. And the Physicians Mutual customers, I would say, like, we feel like we have a very good relationship with, and we work really hard to maintain that. And so, in some cases, it's challenging. I would say from the breadth and the numbers that we have available to us to do our research is a little bit different than other market research that people do. But the quality of the feedback we get is pretty stellar.
Fantastic. And the presentation that you gave at the conference this year, uh, special focus on how to improve self-service adoption and how to have more empathetic customer interactions. Uh, so from my perspective, getting the millennials and the Gen Zers to use your self-server service portal, they probably prefer to do that than call the 800 number and call kind of like if we can't avoid it kind of thing, and then get annoyed when the recording on the 800 number tells me to try the website. If I'm calling, it's because I tried the website already, probably. Um,
Mhm.
is that have you guys found good luck in getting uh, your customer base to use the self-service options?
Well, so in the presentation, I couched it this way. If I asked the group that were there, what is your favorite mode of travel? Right. And some people said they like biking, some people said they like trains, some people said they like, flying and driving. And I said, okay, well, what would it take? What's your least favorite? Right. And some of those people that biked were like, I would rather do that than drive. And ask them, why. And, of course, everybody has their opinions on what they prefer. So I say, okay, well, what would it take for you to move from your favorite way of travel to your least favorite way of travel? How can I get you to move off of that train, that bike, that car? And they'd say, well, you've got to make my least favorite way more like my most favorite way. And so when it comes to self-service technology, that's ultimately what you're fighting, right? Is a lot of times when people call, it's because that's their preference. That's what they want. They want a voice. They want to be able to, sometimes it's just to talk. They don't feel like they understand the fine print, or they're worried that there's fine print. And so they're calling and they feel like that's the way that they're going to get a lot of their questions answered. So if you want them to use self-service technology, you really have to make it more like what they're getting from on the phone, because otherwise, there's no incentive to that. And I would say vice versa. To your point, like, if I'm using self-service because I think it's easier, I think it's quicker, I think it's, going to give me a lot of good answers, and then you call and it's like, well, just go back to the website. It's like, well, I already did that. I need something else. I'm trying something else because I need something else. I need a different approach. I need a different mode of transportation because, well, the one that I used, isn't working. And so I think that's where, that's the story that we try to tell, that we try to use as the analogy of how do we move people off of phones, or maybe give them different options when one isn't working, and kind of take that as our mental model.
Looking at the slides, is this idea of self-service being co-created.
Hmm.
Uh, and that can you see the slide right now?
Yep, I got it.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So self-service being co-created, and how uh, not only is it co-created, but the value needs to the perceived value. That's super, super important. It's not just it is creating value for both sides. We need to make sure that both sides recognize, that the organization recognizes that a value is being created for us, reduce call time, etc. But the customer also, we need to make sure that they understand the value they get from using the service that we prefer for them to use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a two-way street. You can create, your IVR, or you can create automated responses, or you can create chatbots. But if and the organization might do that because they get value out of it, right? But if the customer doesn't perceive that as value, then there is no value. In kind of the same way, where I think this goes sometimes unnoticed, is the customer may see value in some of that, but the organization may not treat it as valuable. So an example might be, if you have, call center agents, um, uh, that don't trust your website, or don't trust the information on the website, right? And you have somebody call in and say, well, check the website, and maybe the agent or the rep is going to say, like, oh, don't worry about that, I'll help you out. Like, I know how to make everything work. I know how to make the system work. I can get you in here, I can get you out. Well, then that diminishes the value of your self-service technology. But that really is, like, the value of that self-service technology exists because both the organization gets something out of it, and so does the customer. And if either one of those drops off, then there really is no value.
And then you've got uh slides on the code destruction of value. Super interesting. That I have not seen addressed anywhere else. As I told you, talk to me about that concept of how we, I'm guessing, accidentally destroy value doing this incorrectly.
Yeah, and I think anytime you can co-create something, you can co-destroy it. And so that does come with value. So just like we talked about, where maybe for the customer, if you have self-service technology, it's going to reduce their time, their effort. It's a little bit easier. It's a little bit accessible. Same thing with the organization, where maybe you're not taking as many calls, but you can then allow your agents to handle more complex issues, right? They're not just answering simple billing questions, or they're not just taking payments. They're actually helping somebody who's in a doctor's office at that moment, who's trying to figure out whether or not they're going to get what type of care to agree to, right? So there's real world consequences to that. But if you have customers who misuse the technology, right? So if you create a chatbot, for example, and we're getting better at this, with AI and stuff, but if you create a chatbot that can only do XYZ, and the customer is trying to use it for something else, then there's no value right there, right? There's also, this idea of future time perspective, that especially with our audience, older generations, it's kind of this, it's this thought of, well, why would I spend time doing this, right? Yeah, I call in once a month to pay my bill, or maybe I call in once every 6 months to know about my care, and maybe it's taking a little bit longer, but it would take me a lot longer to figure out how to do it online. So I'm just going to do it the way that I know. And really, how many times am I going to actually call in and do this? And I think we all do this, not just older adults, where it's just like, well, whatever, it's I'll do it this one time, and I won't do it again for 8 months. So why the heck would I, try and learn something new? With the organization, if you don't have the ability to make it easy for folks, then that can destroy the value. If you're putting in a lot of changes, so as we adopt to AI, or as we adopt to maybe virtual agents, or you adopt to a new system, so to speak, like, there could be some, it's a lot of change for an organization. Take, for example, maybe somebody that's been in the call center for a really long time, and they figured out how to make the system work, right? They're the subject matter expert on the floor. Hey, where do I find this information? Where do I find this document? How do I get this pushed through the system? And they know all that stuff. And then you take that away. And so someone who comes into a call center and within a week can be just as valuable, or have just as good an understanding of how to make the system work, as someone who's been there, 5, 10, 15 years. That's a big change management piece that you may not had to think of. And so that, that older agent, or someone that's been there for a while, are they going to be reluctant? Are you going to be fighting the use of this technology that does have value? And so it doesn't mean that that person has less value to the organization. They just might have different. Like we might have to frame it differently from an organizational development perspective. We're not saying that that person all of a sudden doesn't have any value or shouldn't have that position. It's more of, okay, they do have incredible amount of value. Let's put them in a position where they can really exercise that. Maybe they handle more complex calls. Maybe they are, the go-to agent for different types of trainings or different types of best practices, rather than just, handling those basic, basic level calls.
Every other interview I do on my main podcast nowadays is, well, just about every interview is an AI company, many of whom are claiming to have created voice agents that
Mhm.
that that can do this kind of thing. And I am lucky enough that ultimately I allow them to tell the industry what they do, but I'm not a buyer, so I don't get to actually see it in action. You had a section here on whether this new technology can truly be empathetic and create a climate of service. Uh, what's your experience on that side? Is that tech that we're bringing in actually making a difference positively?
Yeah, I think so. So my take on it, and of course, this changes every day. So by the time you post this, who knows? AI might have already taken over. Um, but what I've heard in my take is that AI is not necessarily going to replace humans, right? It's going to enhance it. So if you look at that in terms of customer experience and customer service and support, there are systems out there that can do a good job of recognizing tone, recognizing sentiment. They recognize combination of words, of like, here's what this person's actually trying to say. So in some cases, it can be used to assist that human, interaction, whether it's on a screen or a prompt or something that says, "Oh, hey, like this person's getting angry. Like maybe we take them and offer to transfer them to a more experienced agent because we don't want to lose this call. We don't want them to hang up. Like we actually want to resolve their problems. They can also, feed them prompts of like, here are maybe some things that you can say or things that might help, ease the situation. Or hey, yeah, this is the document, that this person is referring to. Maybe bring it up in the screen so we can get through this call quicker. So I think it's uh, going to be more of an enhancement model than it is a replacement model. And it can be used in a way to help humans be more empathetic or more impactful with their empathy. So rather than being able to say, I'm sorry to hear that, give me a second, let me go find something, it might be like, oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. And here's my answer right now, or here's what I think you're saying, and we can go ahead and get that handled for you right now.
You have a section here on how to build for this kind of changes and creating a cycle of success. Uh, that seems almost more important than the actual technology you bring in. So how have you guys successfully done that? What have you learned trying to build the right environment to build this cycle of success?
Yeah, I mean, well, it starts number one with dedicating yourself to your customers. So at Physicians Mutual, we've made it our North Star that we are customer centric. That is our preferred operating model. That is what we're going to focus on. Next step then is making sure that you're hearing from your customers in a very systematic way. I think here at Physicians Mutual, I can honestly say I don't think I've ever worked at an organization that cares about its customers more.
Fantastic.
I think we've got a lot of people that have been here. We've got a good mix of people that have been here a long time, and then a lot of people that are, kind of new and helping bring in some new ideas. And you're just not going to fit in here if you're not focused on the customer. The customers here are kind of like the rock stars. Like we have an all employee meeting every year, and we try to bring in customers, to talk to and have them, give presentations and stuff. And it is like they're just like the rock stars. People want to talk to them. People want to hang out with them. It's pretty amazing. I think where that cycle of success is going to help us is to help operationalize that. Right? Is how do we do that in a very systematic way? And it starts by, you know, just talking to your customers. What data do we have from our customers? where are they giving us information, whether that's in surveys, whether that's in social media, whether that's in larger scale research or relationship studies that we're entering into. At this point, I think we've got a lot of data that we've gathered that's going to help us really execute, our long-term vision and of being a incredibly mature customer-centric organization. But then beyond that, that's great. You've got the data, or you've got the feedback. Now, what do you do? Well, you got to take that data and you've got to make it meaningful. You got to turn it into insights. You got to visualize it. You got to socialize it. So, where are we able to do that within this organization? Whether that's in, you know, Tableau, or just we're doing meetings, or we're just, we have our own insights platform where we're publishing this stuff. How do we get that information so it's ready to be acted upon? And then, the other that feeds into then the business line. Your data is, a data point is just a data point. It's meaningless almost until somebody takes action on it. So, sometimes we'll produce data and people will say, well, like, is that a good score? And I was like, well, like, is eight a good score? Like, well, I don't know. Like, depends. Well, what? Well, it depends on what does it compare to our competitors? It depends on what was it last month. It depends on what do we want it to be, and so that's where that data, you've got to answer those questions for the business, or you got to help answer those questions for the business. Anything that comes out of this department that we produce has to be ready made for the business to take action on, or else it's just going to sit there and it just becomes a data point that people can see, and not one that people can take action on. But then beyond the business, right, the next step is that's great. And we package it up and maybe we get buy-in, we'd be able to identify some pain points, and we're going to make that a project to clear those pain points. But then how does that translate into those employees that are actually on the front lines, right? And that's not necessarily just your call center agents, that's that, or your sales agents. That's probably the clearest example, right? Those people that actually bump up and interact with the customers, right? Are they doing it in a way that the customer said, hey, this is how I prefer to be marketed to, this is how I prefer to be called, this is how I prefer to have my support issues handled. But also, it includes people that make decisions on the customer's behalf, right? So this happens all the time in organizations, whether it's a product design, whether it's a creative design, whether it's, we're the call center tech that we're going to use. Even for us, in our department, like interacting with your customers and asking for feedback is a customer interaction. So how are we doing that? Are we mindful with the surveys that we send out, when we send them out? Are we making sure that we're very clear in the language, that we put together our surveys, the right length? Are we asking the right questions? So even us as the customer experience department, we need to be mindful that what we do, we are interacting directly with the customer, and so we need to be doing it in a way that's mindful of their preferences and needs, and the pain points. So that cycle of success includes us as well.
Fantastic. So you're planning to present again next year in Kansas City. Will it be an updated version of this presentation, or what are you thinking you'll be?
Yeah, I think so. I think we got a lot of really good positive feedback on service climate. And so service climate is like the floor level version of customer centricity, right? So if you think of culture, right? If you want to have a customer centric culture, that is, that's grand scale. That's things that occur over time. It's the way the organization has been shaped, for some cases decades. Like that's what your culture is. And I think here at Physicians Mutual, we have a very customer centric culture. The service climate is, how do you measure that at the surface level? So it asks questions, or the way that you validate if you have a good service climate is simple things like, hey, do I trust the person next to me to deliver good service, right? Or if a common example would be at like a bank. You go into a bank branch. Can you ask the employee that's in front of you, hey, if I went to this other person, would I get as good a service as I got from you? And they should be able to say yes. And if they say yes, then that's the climate. That's what it feels like within the bank. Is it doesn't really matter, or the branch doesn't really matter who I go to. I think I'm going to get good service. Another question in service climate that I think gets often overlooked is, can I trust the people that I rely on, to deliver good service? So if I need something. If I have something from a customer that needs to be processed or something that needs to be, problem that needs to be solved, and I send it up or down the chain, am I confident that it's going to get handled? And if the answer to that is yes, then that's an indication of good service climate. So I think we're going to expand on that. But I think also the cycle of success got a lot of great feedback, and so I think we're going to expand that out and talk a little bit more about how we've been able to do that. Maybe there's some pitfalls. Hopefully, by that time, we'll have really incorporated that framework into what we do. I guess I would say I'm pretty new to Physicians Mutual, so um, there's going to be a lot of learnings, I think, over the next however many months before the conference. So I think those are the two things that really resonate with folks that we just barely touched on in that presentation that I'd like to expand on.
Perfect. This sounds like it would be helpful to any insurance organization, because they all deal with a client, and have to worry about getting the customer experience right. And historically, insurance has been built and delivered kind of product centric, and we're all trying to figure out how to be more customer centric. So for the listeners, May 17 to 19 in Kansas City, Missouri, at the Sheraton, the SIR 2026 annual conference. This is part of what you can look forward to. And Jeff, thank you very much for your time today. And
Yeah.
as a fellow first time attendee this last year, do you have any advice for any SIR member that, or listening to the podcast, that has not attended the conference before? What was the conference like? What advice do you have for a first time attendee?
Yeah, I this is just general advice for all conferences that I've gone to lately is um, work with vendors, right? Like to hit up some vendors and have some very meaningful conversations. Um, I will admit that like earlier in my career, when I would go to a conference and it was someplace cool, I'd go to if any of my old bosses are listening, I'm sorry, I apologize in advance, but you go to a conference in Vegas, like, what do you want to do? You want to go out in Vegas, right? So you hit a couple of the meetings and then you take off. And I would say I've sort of switched that, and I spend a lot more time in the vendor, um, in the vendor space, wherever they might have them, talking to vendors. I try to set up a couple of meetings ahead of time because the way that I've changed is, you know, somebody has spent the time and the money and the effort to try and solve a problem for my business, whether it's customer experience, whether it's training, whether it's insurance at this point. And there's a considerable amount of investment in some of these vendors. So I should go talk to them and figure out like what problem did you solve? Like what problem did you think you solved? And then I can go back and say like, well, do we have that problem and does it need to be solved? And then now I've got a network of people that I can tap into to try and figure out can they help me solve this. And so I think it's just a good way to have conversations and get different perspectives of what's going on in your space. What are people trying to actively solve for? What is the value of that? And then is it something that I should really pay attention to? So I would say there was a lot of good vendors there, a lot of people that spent time talking to. And I would say the other part is yeah, just try to network as best you can. Sit with people at different tables. Introduce yourself. Ask them what they do. I think uh, especially this conference, when you get to this niche of a group, it's a good idea to just start taking those names and making connections and asking what people are interested in. I think at this conference particularly, people are very open because we all kind of have the same problems, right? We're kind of all
Yep.
after the same, trying to solve those same problems.
Absolutely. Every conference will love having you say go talk to the vendors.
Yeah, I know. I do.
Because
I will say you do
it's
have to be a little careful, right? Because I mean, I've been in the vendor space as well, and you give a vendor a number and ask them to call. They'll call. They will definitely call.
uh, and this particular conference, I found it to be friendly, and not at all overwhelming. Right, I'm an extreme extrovert. For me, the large conferences are a lot of fun, but most people that work in a research type space are more introverts, this is a conference where you won't be overwhelmed, and where the people there are working on similar research heavy roles within our industry. Lots to learn from each other. Jeff, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to see you in KC and see your presentation. Thank you for giving us a preview of what that will look like and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.